Something shifted in Eastern Europe overnight that most people completely missed. Not a battle, not a bombing, not another drone strike lighting up the sky. Something quieter, something far more calculated. And if what's emerging right now is true, then tens of thousands of Russian soldiers just found themselves in a position no military planner ever wants to be in. Cut off, surrounded, and running out of options. This isn't speculation. The pieces are already in motion. And once you understand what Ukraine just did and why it matters so much, you will never look at this war the same way again. Stay with this, because the next few minutes will completely change how you understand what's happening on the ground in Ukraine right now. For months, military analysts had been watching a specific corridor in eastern Ukraine with growing unease. It wasn't making front-page headlines. There were no viral videos from this stretch of land. But behind closed doors, in military briefings and strategic planning rooms, this corridor had become one of the most discussed pieces of territory in the entire conflict. Why? Because it was the lifeline, the single most important supply route feeding tens of thousands of Russian troops operating deep inside Ukrainian territory. Food, ammunition, fuel, reinforcements, medical supplies. Everything that keeps a frontline army functioning passed through this corridor. And Ukraine knew it. They had known it for a long time. But knowing something and being able to act on it are two completely different things. For months, Ukraine lacked the firepower, the positioning, and the strategic window to do what needed to be done. But then something changed. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces began a series of movements that, at first, looked like standard defensive repositioning. Small unit operations, tactical withdrawals in some areas, advances in others. Military observers on the ground noted it, a few analysts flagged it, but no one connected all the dots, until now. What Ukraine was actually doing was threading a needle. Quietly, methodically, and with extraordinary precision, Ukrainian commanders were positioning their forces not to hold ground, but to close a door. And on the day they finally moved, the Russian military command reportedly did not see it coming fast enough to respond. The corridor was severed. Not damaged, not disrupted. Severed. And when that happened, approximately 65,000 Russian troops found themselves on the wrong side of the line. To understand why this is so significant, you have to understand what being cut off actually means for a modern military force. It does not mean immediate defeat. It does not mean those soldiers are about to surrender tomorrow morning. What it means is something far more psychologically and logistically devastating. It means the clock starts ticking. A force that cannot be resupplied begins to degrade almost immediately. Ammunition stocks, which modern warfare burns through at breathtaking speed, start dropping. Vehicle fuel runs low. Food becomes rationed. Medical care for the wounded becomes improvised and inadequate. But beyond the physical, there is something else. Something that military historians have documented over and over again throughout centuries of warfare. The psychological collapse that begins when soldiers realize they are surrounded. It changes everything about how a unit fights. It changes morale. It changes decision-making. It changes the willingness to take casualties for an objective that suddenly seems impossible. And that is exactly what Ukraine is counting on. Now here is where things take a serious turn. Because this didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen overnight. What Ukraine executed appears to be one of the most carefully planned operational maneuvers of the entire war, and understanding the planning behind it reveals something remarkable about how Ukrainian military strategy has evolved since the early days of the conflict. In 2022, Ukraine was fighting for survival, outnumbered, outgunned, scrambling to hold cities and manage chaos. The strategy then was reactive, hold the line, buy time, absorb the blow. By 2023, something shifted. Ukraine began fighting smarter. The counter-offensive in Kharkiv showed the world that Ukrainian forces could move fast, exploit gaps, and take ground when the conditions were right. But this, what is unfolding right now, is something else entirely. This is strategic thinking on a completely different level. Military analysts who have been studying the maps describe what Ukraine did as a logistics strangulation operation. The concept is not new. Armies have used it since ancient times. You don't have to destroy your enemy's forces if you can simply starve them of everything they need to fight. But executing it in modern warfare against a nuclear-armed military power with satellite reconnaissance, drone surveillance, and signals intelligence, that is extraordinarily difficult. To do it successfully requires deception, patience, timing, and an intimate understanding of where your enemy is most vulnerable. Ukraine apparently had all four. The operation reportedly involved several simultaneous actions designed to confuse Russian command about Ukrainian intentions. Feints in one direction while the real movement happened somewhere else. Electronic warfare operations that masked troop movements. Coordinated strikes on specific bridges, supply nodes, and communication relays that degraded Russia's ability to respond in real time. And by the time Russian commanders fully understood what was happening, the gate was already closed. But what happened next changed everything. Because closing the corridor was only the beginning. Once those 65,000 troops were cut off, Ukraine faced a decision that would define the next phase of the war. Do you press the advantage immediately, striking hard at the now isolated force before it can reorganize? Or do you hold the perimeter, force a siege, and let the clock do the work for you? This is the question that military planners in Kyiv are reportedly wrestling with right now. And the answer they choose will determine not just the outcome of this operation, but potentially the broader trajectory of the entire conflict. Each option carries enormous risks. Each carries enormous rewards. And the wrong choice, made too quickly, could unravel everything Ukraine just achieved. Here is what most people don't realize about the situation those 65,000 Russian soldiers are now in. They are not a single unified force. Among those cut-off troops are units from multiple Russian military districts. Some are professional soldiers, some are mobilized conscripts with minimal training, some are reportedly mercenary units operating under different command structures entirely. This matters enormously, because a cut-off force is only as cohesive as the relationships between its commanders. And a force made up of competing units, different loyalties, different levels of training and motivation, is a force that fragments under pressure. History is full of examples. Stalingrad, the Falaise Pocket, Dien Bien Phu. When surrounded forces begin to fracture internally, the collapse, when it comes, happens faster than anyone predicted. Ukraine's commanders know this history, they have studied it, and they are watching closely for the first signs of internal fracture among the encircled Russian forces. There is another dimension to this story that has received almost no attention, the diplomatic dimension. Because 65,000 stranded soldiers are not just a military problem for Russia, they are a political crisis. Inside Russia, the information space is tightly controlled. State media has not reported on the encirclement in anything close to an accurate way, but information travels through other channels, through phone calls, home, through encrypted messaging apps, through soldiers' families asking questions that official spokespeople cannot answer. The pressure that is building inside Russia right now, quietly, invisibly, in kitchens and phone conversations and private messages, is the kind of pressure that governments fear more than anything military. Because it is the pressure of mothers asking where their sons are, of wives who haven't received a message in days, of families who are starting to understand that something has gone very wrong. The pressure doesn't show up on satellite imagery. It doesn't appear in battlefield maps, but it is real, and it is building. Meanwhile, in the capitals of NATO and Western Europe, the response to Ukraine's operation has been something unusual. Quiet confidence, not celebration, not triumphalism. Military and intelligence officials understand too well how quickly situations can reverse on a battlefield. But behind the cautious public statements, there's a genuine recognition that what Ukraine just executed is significant. Some officials have reportedly described it as the most consequential single operation Ukraine has conducted since the liberation of Kherson. That comparison is significant. The liberation of Kherson was a turning point, a moment that forced a fundamental reassessment of Russian military capability and Ukrainian military potential. If this encirclement holds, if those 65,000 troops remain cut off and degraded, the reassessment that follows could be even more profound. But here's where things get complicated, because Russia is not sitting still. Within hours of the encirclement becoming apparent, Russian military command reportedly began emergency operations to reestablish supply lines, airdrops, alternative ground routes through difficult terrain, attempts to punch through Ukrainian lines from the outside. So far, those attempts have not succeeded. Ukrainian air defense and artillery have made aerial resupply extremely costly. The alternative ground routes are slow, exposed, and logistically insufficient to sustain 65,000 troops over any significant period of time. But Russia has resources. Russia has depth. And Russia has a pattern of absorbing catastrophic losses and continuing to push anyway. The critical question is whether what Russia can bring to bear externally is enough to counteract what Ukraine is applying from the perimeter. It is a race. And right now, by most assessments, Ukraine is winning it. There's a moment in almost every major military encirclement throughout history when the surrounded force has a choice. Fight through, dig in, or collapse. Fighting through requires concentrated force, surprise, and coordination. In theory, 65,000 soldiers attempting a breakout simultaneously could overwhelm a perimeter. But coordinating that kind of mass movement under fire without secure communications, with degraded logistics and fragmented command structures, is nearly impossible in practice. Digging in turns the situation into a siege. It buys time but burns through supplies faster. And every day that passes without resupply makes the eventual outcome more certain. Collapse is what Ukraine is engineering toward. Not through one decisive blow, but through the grinding, relentless application of pressure from every direction simultaneously. The pressure of hunger, the pressure of ammunition shortages, the pressure of watching your position shrink, the pressure of knowing that reinforcement is not coming fast enough, these pressures compound. And when they reach a critical mass, the result comes quickly. What most analysts are watching most closely right now is not the military situation on the ground. It is the Russian command decision that will come in the next 72 to 96 hours. Because at some point, Russian military leadership has to make a call. Do they commit massive resources to a relief operation, stripping other parts of the front to push through to their encircled forces? That risks creating new vulnerabilities elsewhere, vulnerabilities that Ukraine could immediately exploit. Or do they accept the loss of the corridor, reposition around it, and attempt to stabilize a new defensive line? That is an admission of a major strategic defeat, with enormous implications for morale, for politics, and for Russia's broader war aims. Neither option is good. And the fact that Russia is being forced to choose between two bad options is precisely what makes Ukraine's achievement here so remarkable. There is something else you need to understand about this moment. It is not just about the 65,000 soldiers. Every war has moments that shift the psychological balance, moments that change what both sides believe is possible, moments that make the soldiers on one side feel that momentum is with them and make the soldiers on the other side feel that something fundamental has changed. This is one of those moments. For Ukrainian soldiers who have been holding lines, absorbing pressure, and fighting from a position of constant stress, news of a successful major encirclement operation is transformative. It validates the sacrifice. It proves that their commanders are capable of more than just survival. It shows that victory, real victory, is possible. For Russian soldiers, particularly those now cut off, but also those elsewhere on the front, who are watching this unfold, the message is different and deeply unsettling. If it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. That thought, spreading quietly through a military force, is more powerful than any single battle. The next few days will be among the most consequential of this entire war. Not because of one dramatic event, but because of the slow, grinding accumulation of strategic reality. Every hour those 65,000 troops remain cut off is an hour their situation degrades. Every failed Russian relief attempt is another signal to the broader military of where this operation is heading. Every Ukrainian soldier holding that perimeter is demonstrating something the world needs to see. That Ukraine has learned how to fight this war, not just with courage, which was never in question, but with the kind of strategic sophistication that wins conflicts. There is still enormous uncertainty ahead. War is unpredictable. Situations reverse, plans fail, commanders make mistakes, and opponents adapt. But right now, in this moment, Ukraine holds an advantage it has fought extraordinarily hard to create. And what they do with it will shape not just the battlefield, but the entire future of this conflict. The gate is closed, 65,000 soldiers are stranded on the other side of it, and the world is watching to see what happens next. Because what happens next does not stay in Ukraine. What happens next sends a message that echoes across every contested border on the planet. It tells every government, every military planner, every world leader who has been watching this war and drawing conclusions about power, about resolve, about what a smaller nation can achieve against a larger one, what is possible. Ukraine has closed the gate. Now comes the hardest part. Keeping it closed?